Welcome back, digital explorers and sci fi enthusiasts, to another journey through the pixels and bytes that shape our favorite virtual experiences. Today, we dial back the clock to the eerie corridors of 1992, where a game dared to blend Lovecraftian horror with an uncanny artistic vision by H.R. Giger. Enter Darkseed, a point and click adventure that plunges players into a nightmarish world challenging both their sanity and puzzle solving skills. Set in the seemingly mundane town of Woodland Hills, the game follows Mike Dawson, a writer who, after purchasing an old Victorian house, discovers a parallel dimension called the Dark World. This realm, a mirror of his own with a sinister twist, is influenced heavily by the biomechanical artwork of Giger, known for his work on Alien. Darkseed was groundbreaking not only for its integration of high resolution artwork that pushed the graphical boundaries of its time, but also for its ambitious narrative that interwove an alien conspiracy deeply rooted in its gameplay and storytelling. Join us as we unravel the dark thread of Mike Dawson's reality and the chilling echoes of the dark world that challenge the fabric of his very existence. Strap in, because we're going to dive deep into the shadows of gaming history on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello, and welcome to the 196th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people that created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about all the companies that bring it together, making our hobby video gaming a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are diving in to the chilling depths of Dark Seed, a 1992 adventure game that combined H.R. Giger's unnerving biomechanical artwork with intricate point and click puzzle gameplay. Released into the world of gaming, Dark Seed offers a unique blend of real world visuals and a nightmarish alien dimension that challenges its protagonist, Mike Dawson's sanity. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, who is as intrigued by alien worlds as he is by alien movies. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, have you woken up in any weird alien and or alternate dimensions lately?
Well, I may have never fallen asleep.
So are you implying that this is a weird alien dimension?
That's the crazy thing, Dave.
Is
You
it?
never know.
You never know. Actually, you don't know. Well, truthfully, in the topic of today's episode, you would definitely know. You definitely know. It's very different. Or maybe this is the biomechanical reality. Who knows? You might be right.
Guess we'll find out.
Guess we will certainly find out. Or maybe we won't. That's the beauty of what we do. Maybe you already know. Maybe we're all just living in some Matrix type HR Giger reality. So,
You never know until you know, Dave.
all right. So tell us about this week in gaming history.
All right, on June 1st, 1977, and yes, by the time this is released, we will hit June this weekend, Nintendo released the Color TV game, marking one of the company's earliest ventures into the video game industry. This home video game console series included several models that were developed and sold exclusively in Japan. The first model, Color TV Game 6, featured 6 variations of Light Tennis, a Pong clone that could be played directly on a television, utilizing simple dial controllers integrated into the hardware itself. The Color TV game series was a success, demonstrating Nintendo's capacity for innovation and setting the stage for its future as a major player in the global video game market. These early systems were fundamental in establishing Nintendo's reputation in the gaming industry long before the advent of their iconic characters and advanced gaming systems. We covered it and the earlier history of Nintendo back in episode 144, so go learn about all that wherever you listen to our podcast.
Nice.
Indeed. Moving along, on May 30th, 1979, IRM Corporation, the predecessor to what would become Capcom, was founded. Initially established as Integrated Research and Manufacturing, or IRM Corporation, the company began as a joint venture that primarily focused on manufacturing and distributing electronic game machines. Over time, the company saw a strategic opportunity to shift focus towards the development of video games. And in 1983, the entity known as Capcom was officially formed from IRM as an acronym for Capsule Computers, a term they used to describe their arcade machines, which were designed to be robust like capsules. Capcom would go on to become one of the most influential game developers and publishers in the industry, known for iconic franchises such as Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and Mega Man. And we have done episodes on several of those.
We have indeed done episodes on all of them, actually.
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah, all of them.
So
Yeah,
go
Street
check it out.
Fighter, Resident Evil, and Mega Man. We covered the beginning of all those franchises. And it's funny, as I wrote that, I was thinking, I've done a Capcom history somewhere, and I couldn't remember the episode. And I was so focused on that I didn't even think to look up the fact that we have done episodes on Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and Mega Man, and most definitely at least one of those is going to include that history.
Or all three. So go check them out. Find out what Dave forgot.
Mm-hmm.
On May 27th, 1986, Dragon Warrior, which was known as Dragon Quest in Japan, was released, marking the beginning of what would become one of the most influential and beloved role playing game franchises. Developed by Enix, now Square Enix, and created by Yuji Horii, the game was designed to be accessible to a broader audience with its simplified RPG mechanics compared to the more complex titles of the time. Set in a medieval fantasy realm, players take on the role of a hero tasked with rescuing a princess and saving the kingdom from the evil Dragon Lord. Dragon Warrior is credited with laying the foundations for the JRPG genre, featuring turn based combat, a detailed storyline, character progression, all elements that have become staples in RPGs worldwide. Its release marked a significant point in video game history, influencing countless developers and titles in the RPG genre. And we learned all about the creation of Dragon Quest and the history of Enix back in episode 143. So go back and listen if you want to learn about that.
Yeah, go do that.
On May 29th, 2014, 10 years ago, Mario Kart 8 was released, becoming one of the most acclaimed entries in Nintendo's long-standing Mario Kart series. Launched for the Wii U, this installment introduced high-def graphics, anti-gravity racing sections where players can either drive on walls or upside down, and enhanced online multiplayer capabilities. The game features a robust roster of characters and imaginative tracks, including revamped versions of classic courses that utilize the game's new dynamic racing mechanics. Mario Kart 8 was praised for its innovative track design, polished presentation, and the seamless incorporation of traditional kart racing elements with new, inventive twists. Its popularity and success led to the expanded release of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for the Nintendo Switch in 2017, which included additional content and further refinements.
And it's an awesome game.
If you're into Mario Karts, yes, 8 was a very good one.
You can't go wrong with Mario Karts.
I mean, I guess I'm just bad at them.
Okay.
On May 31st, 2014, GameSpy, a popular service known for its multiplayer game server hosting and matchmaking services, officially shut down its servers. This closure affected a wide range of games across various platforms that relied on GameSpy for their online multiplayer functionalities. Originally launched in 1996, GameSpy grew to become an essential part of the online gaming infrastructure, supporting matchmaking and leaderboards for many popular and beloved titles. Shutdown was announced after the company was acquired by Glue Mobile, which decided to discontinue the service. The decision led to significant disruption for numerous games, forcing developers and publishers to find alternative solutions to keep their games' online services operational. In some cases, the games were patched to use different networking services, while others unfortunately lost their multiplayer capabilities entirely. The GameSpy shutdown marked the end of an era for classic online gaming and prompted the gaming community and developers to reassess and adapt to new methods of supporting online multiplayer experiences.
Everything used GameSpy at one point, like
Oh yeah,
PC
that was such a
wise,
common name.
right? On PC
You
side,
saw
it
it
was all over the place.
all the time.
Hmm.
And last up, on May 28th, 2015, Nintendo introduced a fresh and innovative take on the multiplayer shooter genre with the release of Splatoon for the Wii U. This vibrant and colorful game features squid like characters known as Inklings, who battle in paint wars to control territory. Instead of traditional weapons, players use ink guns to cover their environment and their opponents in colorful paint. Splatoon stands out for its unique gameplay mechanics, including the ability to swim through ink of the same color for rapid movement and stealth tactics. The game quickly gained popularity for its family friendly approach to competitive gaming, creative design, and the dynamic nature of its matches, establishing a strong community and fan base. It was praised for its originality and became a significant success, leading to the development of further entries in the series.
You ever play Splatoon?
Not the original. I have played 2 and watched a lot of gameplay of 3 because a lot of my friends are very into Splatoon. Well, I don't know if very is the right word, but they do most of the Splatfest events and stuff. So when they're running through that, I'll hang out with them.
There's a Splatfest.
Splatfest, Salmon Run, just events like any game.
Okay, did not know that. Never got into those.
Well, it's an interesting game. You have to at least try it once, Dave.
Keep that in mind.
All right. Well, with that, I think it's time for me to kick it back to you for you to tell us all about today's topic.
Hans Rudy Giger, known to the world as H.R. Giger, was born in Switzerland in 1940. When he was asked in 2009 about the origins of his art style, he said that as a young boy, he was obsessed with skulls and mummies and things like that. He was a child with a vivid imagination, once writing that the cellar of his childhood home was a monstrous labyrinth where all kinds of dangers laid in wait for me. And while other young boys were playing with toy cars, Giger was making ghost trains with skulls and other morbid things, so to speak.
That he just found.
I don't know if they were real skulls. I think they were maybe art, like fashion skulls.
Okay. Much
But
less creepy.
the thing of it is he was definitely, you get the sense that he was definitely the kind of person who saw the the fear in everything, right? The cellar was a monstrous labyrinth, and the stairs led down into a dark abyss where you can't see the bottom, and the ghost train, the ghost train would toll at midnight type deal. Like he was that kid, right? Like the weird one that was into all the morbid stuff, so to speak. But
Yeah, definitely know that kid.
it gave him nightmares and strange dreams. And so he began sketching these images in order to channel all this fear into something more productive, like art therapy, you know? Hans's father was a pharmacist, and his father wanted him to, like most fathers, follow in his footsteps. But Hans did not. Hans left home to study interior and industrial design at the School of Commercial Art in Zurich in the mid 1960s. And some of his first paintings there, his first paintings he ever did, like that we know of, were actually done there actually as part of art therapy. And by some definitions, Giger fit the mold of like the starving, tortured artist. He got a 9 to 5, a normal 9 to 5, like so many of us have as a designer for an office furniture company. So, I mean, he wasn't technically a starving artist, but he was frequently found in flats in condemned houses, however, that worked. He worked during the day and created art long into the evening. He caught the attention of the right people, ended up in art galleries, thus catching the attention of even more people, which we'll come back to in a moment. And at the age of 25, he fell in love with 18-year-old Lee Tobler, who would become a notable Swiss actress. She worked far enough away during the early parts of the relationship that they could only meet up on weekends. And then Giger's uncle died and left them an inheritance. And so they bought a house in the suburbs and they moved in together. So it wasn't always condemned, flats and condemned houses. Eventually they got together and they moved into like a normal life. But they were both notable figures, and they had what we would probably refer to as that Hollywood tabloid type of relationship. It involved promiscuity on both their parts. There was frequent drug use. They were that kind of couple. And they were on again, off again, on again, off again. They broke up, saw other people. She went and got an American boyfriend and went to America for like 2 months. And then she came back and apologized and they got back together. And it was, I mean, for all purposes, it was a tumultuous relationship. And, they are both tortured figures. Both could probably say that they suffered from depression and they played off one another. And this went back and forth until she ended up committing suicide at the age of 27.
Wow.
Because of the nature of Giger's work, which we'll cover in a second, it's dark and morbid, he was accused of negatively influencing her. And there is no doubt that his work became even more darker in tone after she died. His style is best known as biomechanical. It is a representation of human bodies and machines in cold, interconnected relationships. They are often overtly sexual, intertwined machines, people, so on and so forth. Now, you may not know H.R. Giger's work firsthand. If you know biomechanical, you know it because he's the poster child of biomechanical. I love biomechanical. I played a game recently, wasn't it Scorn, where I talked about biomechanical?
I
And,
don't recall.
and so you may not know H.R. Giger's work directly, but with that being said, if you are a fan of cinema, more specifically science fiction, there is no doubt whatsoever that you've seen Giger's work. And doubling down on that, if you are familiar at all with classic video games, you've no doubt experienced video games that have that have had their design influenced by Giger as well. So in 1974, Alejandro Jodorowsky was asked to direct a film version of Frank Herbert's Dune. Now, we have a version of Dune. We just got Dune Part 2 in the theaters here in 2024. But long ago, there have been other versions of Dune. People have been trying to do it for years. In fact, as early here as 1974, because this was going to be one of the first film. This was the first time anyone had ever gotten a film license to Frank Herbert's novel, Dune, right? And if you study film at all, you know that Jodorowsky's Dune is like the stuff of legend, right? So one of the people that caught Giger's attention, or that like noticed Giger, was Salvador Dali, the famous artist Dali.
Damn.
And Jodorowsky was a Dali fan too, and he supposedly offered Salvador Dali $100,000 an hour to play the Emperor in the movie, in what would have been his only speaking role as a film actor. He offered Orson Welles the role, who only agreed after Jodorowsky offered to get his favorite gourmet chef to prepare his meals for him throughout filming. The music was going to be composed by Pink Floyd and Magma. They had a $9.5 million budget initially, and Jodorowsky spent $2 million of it on pre-production alone. And the script he came up with through the process is said to have resulted in what would have been a 14-hour movie.
Jeez.
Needless to say, once Jodorowsky's vision of Dune became clear, there was no movie studio that was willing to fund the production. It was clearly going outside the terms that were agreed upon, that $9.5 million budget. And as they began to look for a studio that was actually going to, work with them on the terms, no one wanted to do it anymore, and the production was aborted. There was actually a really fascinating documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune that came out like 10 years ago. It's wild. I recommend it to anyone. But one thing that Jodorowsky did that has resonated throughout cinema was create a pre-production unit that consisted of, for one, H.R. Giger. Salvador Dali recommended Giger to Jodorowsky, and Jodorowsky brought Giger in. He also brought a man named Chris Fawson, who designed covers for science fiction magazines. He brought a man named Jean Giraud, who was a French illustrator who wrote and drew for Heavy Metal magazine. And there was a screenwriter and special effects supervisor named Dan O'Bannon. He brought all these men together as a pre-production unit, and this would not be the last time that these men worked together, even though that project fell through. In the meantime, Giger continued to work on his art, and in 1977, he published a very famous compendium of images that is titled H.R. Giger's Necronomicon. It was definitely an homage to H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon, and it's probably Giger's most famous collection of art for more than one reason. That Necronomicon, Giger's Necronomicon, was on its way into just the right hands. So the shutdown of Dune left Dan O'Bannon broke, homeless, and dependent on friends to survive. And one of the friends that he was depending on was a film producer named Richard Shusett. Now, Shusett is probably best known now for Total Recall. You ever seen the movies Total Recall?
Yeah.
So he did the Total Recall movies, but he did other movies too. And early on in their careers, him and O'Bannon got together and they formed a pact that basically said, hey, we want to collaborate on movies. And they started to write scripts and throw out ideas on projects that they wanted to collaborate on. And O'Bannon's contribution to this agreement was a 29-page script in which a crew of astronauts awakens to find that their voyage had been interrupted because they are receiving a signal from a mysterious planetoid. And basically, they investigate, their ship breaks down, and, stuff happens. This project early on was called Memory. And it was shelved when he accepted the offer to work on Dune. But now that Dune was gone, he needed a new project, and he got back together with Shusett. They lived together, actually, and they agreed that they would pick up their collaboration. So the men get together, and Memory was their strongest prospect, and so they basically worked together and came up with ideas, and what Memory turned into is the first Alien movie. You ever seen Alien?
Once or twice.
So Alien was shopped around, and it was greenlit and given to director Ridley Scott. It's a very famous movie now. Cinema people are going to know it. Some years later, O'Bannon would admit that his time with Giger on the Dune project was incredibly influential to Alien. He had never seen anything quite so horrible and beautiful at the same time, and that he had realized later on that he had actually written a script about a Giger monster. So when it came time to design the movie, O'Bannon no doubt suggested to Ridley Scott that Giger was brought on, and the Necronomicon was put into Ridley Scott's hands. Now the story goes that somehow it just magically got into his hands, but I mean it's hard to not put this all together. Depending on the tale of the story that you look at, you're either going to see it, oh, he tripped on the Necronomicon, and other people are going to be like, well, O'Bannon and Giger worked together, and this was definitely O'Bannon saying, yo, we got to bring this guy on, you know?
Right.
So Ridley Scott immediately sees the potential in Giger's artwork and he brings the artist in. In fact, one of the paintings in that book, which is called Necronom 4, is literally the direct inspiration for the alien himself. Ridley Scott saw that picture and he said, that's my xenomorph, because that's what the aliens are called. That's my xenomorph. And the earliest sketches of the xenomorph in the Alien movie are pretty much identical to Necronom 4. So direct inspiration, H.R. Giger. Giger's design, along with the work of the special effects team, would earn them all an Academy Award for special effects in 1980. So if you've seen Alien, you've seen what is probably Giger's most famous piece of work, no doubt, right?
I would say that's safe to say.
Well, then let's talk about video games, because he definitely was influential on video games. In a 2014 interview in The Guardian, John Romero, designer of the first person shooter Doom, said that while designing Doom, the artist kept the Necronomicon open in front of them to help them come up with crazy, disturbing stuff. That's why he said that's why we have walls that have spines and screaming faces and Marines impaled on spikes. It inspired hellish monsters like the cacodemon, the one that flies, shoots lightning, and spills its blue guts when it dies, rather. It looks very cartoonish today, Romero said, but it was the coolest thing when it came out. So, so yeah, Giger's very influential. There are no doubt other games that have been influenced by Giger, like back when the monsters in the Contra series were probably done by Giger, like not done by Giger, but I mean influenced by Giger. You know what I mean? There was, God, I don't know, a game called Alien Syndrome, a game called Tormentum, that all are inspired by his artwork. Really, anything that is alien related, like Alien Isolation, probably one of the best survival horror games ever created, even to this day. I mean, the xenomorph is front and center for that one, so that's got Giger's influence. What else? Shoot, Super Metroid is kind of biomechanical, with the way, like, I mean, literally in Super Metroid, I think Ridley is biomechanical, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
Yeah, I'm not really sure on that. I, haven't really paid much attention to Ridley.
oh, and speaking of Super Metroid, there is a modern Metroidvania game called Axiom Verge, which is definitely biomechanical. I mean, that's got the influence written all over it. So, and then of course, I was talking briefly, I alluded to it already, but that game that came out in Game Pass, I think it was last year that I played through, that was all biomechanical. It was called Scorn. Scorn was basically Scorn is a first person like biopunk themed game filled with that same concept, this nightmarish world that has grotesque creatures and techno organic living structures that are machine and flesh and bone all come together. And yeah, I mean, the people who designed Scorn have literally said that Giger was a direct inspiration for it. So you know, Giger's influence is all over the place, even as early here as Doom. It's really funny if you look at it, because while the team at id was working on Doom, Giger himself was providing input towards a video game that was specifically based on his artwork. And that game, dear listeners, is why we're gathered here today, to learn all about what the team at Cyberdreams was working on along H.R. Giger himself. But first, are you looking to start your own podcast but just don't know where to start? Do you sit down and look at all the tools available to you and just get overwhelmed? Well, stop. We have a solution for you to help you jump over all those hurdles. Our friends at Zencaster have created an all in one podcasting suite of tools that makes it easier than ever to create your own podcast.
With Zencaster, it's super easy to record a podcast. Everyone logs in using their web browser, and you just start recording a high quality podcast right away. It allows you to record up to 4K video with your guests, and with Zencaster's multi layered backups, you always have the highest quality recordings, even if your connection is unstable.
With Zencaster, you never have to worry about what you sound like. Zencaster's post production process makes you sound buttery smooth. You can remove all those ums and ahs, the filler words. You can get rid of long pauses in conversation. You can set a specific podcast loudness, reduce some background noise. It's got all these cool features. You just don't go down a menu, click, 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 click. This is what I want. Hit the produce button, and then it just does its thing. When it's done doing everything that you asked, it sends you an email that says your post production's ready, and you go back and you download it, and you can do whatever you want with it.
And even if the thought of podcasting overwhelms you because you think you need tons of different tools and services, relax. With Zencaster's all in one podcasting platform, you can do all that nifty stuff that Dave talked about. You know, you do your editing, reduce background noise, get rid of those awkward pauses. It's all with one click of a button, and then you can use that to distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
So if you'd like to start your own podcast, or maybe you're interested in taking your current podcast to the next level, we've got a deal for you. Go to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code MemoryCardLane, all one word, and you'll get 30% off the first month of any of their paid plans.
Sign up for Zencaster today, and you can experience the same ease in producing your own high quality podcast as we do each week. Go out and share your idea with the world.
Yeah, share those ideas. Woo!
Do it. Woo!
So, H.R. Giger's video game collaboration was called Dark Seed, and Dark Seed ended up being the first title published by a company called Cyberdreams. They were a video game publisher that would gain a reputation, albeit briefly. I think they were around for 7 years. Their reputation is that they specialized in adventure games developed in collaboration with famous names from fantasy, horror, and the science fiction genres. In that 7 years, they would announce collaborations with American writer Harlan Ellison, Dungeons and Dragons creator Gary Gygax, film director Wes Craven, and of course, H.R. Giger here. Cyberdreams actually reached out to Giger about using his artwork in a video game. It was their idea. And Giger was very interested. You know, he had a lot of success in film, and no doubt he could see how that would translate over to video games. And he was interested, but he was very much against the proposed use of what is called VGA mode 13H. Now, 13H is 13 hexadecimal. 13H specifically refers to the mode in the VGA BIOS. And this was the standard VGA mode that was used in VGA graphics hardware for much of the late 80s and early 90s. A lot of your really well-known adventure games, games period in that period, were designed on VGA mode 13. Now, we didn't call it VGA mode 13. It was like VGA 256 color mode, but it was the most commonly used one when we got 256 colors. And you had 256 colors at your disposal, which made things look great, but only a maximum resolution of 320 by 200. To kind of put into perspective, 1080 is 1920 by 1080, right? Now what 1080 is?
Sure.
Sure, we'll go with that. So anyways, like you had all these colors, but not as much resolution as a result. And Giger was willing to give them access to his artwork, but only if they were able to use them at higher resolutions. He felt that the small lower resolution of the 13H mode would result in the edges being square and jagged. So they went some back and forth with it, and Cyberdreams agreed to use a higher mode available to them, which was a resolution of 640 by 350. It's more resolution, but only with access to 16 colors. So it was a compromise, right?
Definitely.
And with that agreement out of the way, the team at Cyberdreams was given access to almost all of Giger's artwork, just unfettered access to it. It was fantastic. And what they worked it into was a story about a writer who buys an old mansion. And on the first night at his house, he has a nightmare about being imprisoned by a machine that shoots an alien embryo into his brain. Very Giger-esque. I mean, to a T. Like, there are literally Giger artwork with guns that have these little alien embryo bullets in them. It's very cool that that's where they started, if you're into Giger and biomechanism stuff. So this protagonist of this game wakes up with a huge headache, and he begins to explore the mansion after, he takes a shower, takes a painkiller to try to knock it, and he slowly starts to find clues about the previous owner's death. And in doing so, he learns about the existence of a parallel universe called the Dark World, which is ruled rather, by sinister aliens called the Ancients. Now, as the story unfolds, he gains access to the Dark World. So every room in the mansion has a Dark World counterpart. And for a lot of the puzzles, you have to go back and forth, get something from the Dark World, for instance, and bring it into the real world to move forward the puzzle. So a lot of back and forth with it. And as the story unfolds, he gains access to this dark world, and he learns that his dream was not, in fact, a dream. It was real, and what was shot into his brain is known as the dark seed. Now, the dark seed isn't a seed, it is an alien embryo, and if that embryo is born, it will not only kill him, but that alien has the capacity to end all of humanity. So then it becomes a story of saving the world, right? Got to save himself, got to save the world. The Dark World, like I said, is made up entirely of Giger's artwork. In order to create it, the developers used Epson flatbed scanner. They would scan his artwork in and import like selected pieces from it, selected body parts, selected landscape fragments, and monochrome. And then they would use Deluxe Paint 2 Enhanced for MS-DOS to assemble these body parts into a single image. They also used an Amiga computer and an SVHS camera. That's the camera after original VHS, for those of you who don't know. A little bit
What's
higher
that?
quality. I know. What's VHS? VCR
Yeah.
tapes? VCR tapes.
I
You were
don't know what
around
that
for
is.
VCR tapes. Okay.
Nope.
They use an Amiga and a SVHS camera that digitized actors' poses, and they edited those on that computer as well. So they did all this work, and then late into the development process, they decided that all of the images that they created through this process were really inadequate for the quality of game, more specifically the quality of Giger's artwork that they had hoped to put out. So they went back to the beginning, and instead of this monochrome landscape, so to speak, they spent 6 months hand colorizing all of the artwork. A lot of work went into making this an accurate and beautiful, frankly, depiction of Giger's artwork, really. Now, this game is not a big investment. It plays out over 3 hours, like 3 real-time hours, our time. If you're, it's got a time limit. So if you know exactly what you're doing, you can beat it in 3 hours. Each hour in real life represents 1 day in the game, and you have until the end of the third day to save the world. But the catch is that it's not all straightforward. This is your atypical puzzle game from that time period, right? Where game designers hadn't yet learned the art, so to speak, of designing a game that you couldn't lose. And what I mean by that is those adventure games from that time period are notorious for having what we call unwinnable states. And an unwinnable state is when you don't know how to do something or to pick up something and you forget and you don't do it, and eventually you get to a point where you need it and there's no way to go back to get that thing, and so there's no way to progress in the game. It is unwinnable at that point. Old adventure games were notorious for it. That is partly why so many of them are known to be difficult, and Darkseid is no different. It had many parts to its game that had to be done at certain times or in a certain order. So if you didn't know that, you would literally get to a point where the only thing you could do was restart the entire game from the beginning, which
Wow.
sucks, frankly.
Yeah, it
I mean,
does.
you know, but 3 hours is not a big investment, right? Like we think about that now, like what would happen if we were 10 hours into a game. But we're talking like you may be an hour into a game. We've all done stupid things and lost an hour of progress before, you know?
Oh, most
So,
definitely.
but I mean, and back then it was just a thing. It was a thing. Like I said, game designers hadn't yet learned how not to do that. Most of the adventure games designed back then, they all had unwinnable states. Early Lucas Art adventure games were notorious for having like random unwinnable in like scenarios. So it happened. So Dark Seed is just what I said it is. You know, it's got two worlds to it. You have the real world and you have the H.R. Giger world, the dark world, and basically all the puzzles consisted of you finding a clue on one side and taking that clue to the other, and you would just go back and forth to solve all the puzzles. And again, the dark world is completely completely designed of Giger's artwork. So it's literally his stuff. And Darkseid ended up being moderately successful for Cyberdreams, so much so that they licensed Giger's artwork to make another Darkseid 2, a few years later in 1995. In the second Darkseid, the main character from the first game, who was Mike Dawson. Why did I not know the name? It's literally the producer, like the designer of the game, Mike Dawson. They took the producer of the game and they literally put him into the game. Like it's his likeness and everything. They redrew him into the game. So they took the producer Mike Dawson. He's the protagonist in the first game, and when they go to do the second game, he basically has a mental breakdown after having like all these nightmares after the events of the first game. He ends up surviving, and the world is saved, no doubt, because they can make a second one, right?
Right?
And so he basically has a mental breakdown after he can't let go of what happened in the first one. And he ends up back at home living with his mother. He attends his high school reunion, and after the reunion, his girlfriend is found murdered, and he becomes the prime suspect. And so he gets together with a friend, and they're out there trying to clear his name. And while doing so, he learns that the ancients have returned, and they're once again trying to conquer the earth. And then the story just kind of unfolds from there. Now, interestingly enough, Darkseid 2 is made by a completely different team. In fact, the only matching credit I could find at like a quick glance between them, I will admit, I didn't go into the game and look at the whole thing. I got the Cliff Notes credits. When you go through the Cliff Notes, the only name I could find that matched between the two of them was H.R. Giger himself, because his artwork was licensed for the second one. There are, however, a couple of fun things I think you should know about the second one. So, the writer slash designer of Darkseid 2, his name is Raymond Benson, and he has some other interesting credits. He novelized right about the same time the screenplays of Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough, two James Bond movies. So basically, he took those movie scripts and he turned them into a book form. That's what novelization is. He also has credits writing novelizations of some video games. So he takes the plot of a video game and he writes it into a book. He did that to Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. He did that to Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, one of the Hitman games, and he also did it most recently to a game called Dying Light. So he's done it recently too. The composer on Darkseid 2 is a man named Mark Morgan. Mark Morgan also wrote the music for a few of the later Zork games, which a lot of games actually that we've covered on this podcast. He wrote music for some of the later Zork games, for Descent 2, for Fallout 1 and 2, for Civilization Call to Power, for Need for Speed Shift, for Wasteland 2 and 3, as well as a game called Planescape Torment. In fact, his first video game composition credit was Zork Nemesis, which I think is the second to last most recent Zork game. And then his second credit was Darkseid 2. So there's some people who went on to do some good things that did Darkseid 2, actually, you know. Cyberdreams as a company puts out 2 of these games. I think their catalog only has like 6 titles total before they shut it down in 1997. And the Darkseeds are not their most famous game. Their most famous game was their collaboration with Harlan Ellison, who was a sci-fi author. They did an adaptation of his short story, which is called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And that point-and-click adventure version of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, it pops up every so often on lists of like underrated or sleeper video games, so to speak. It's a game that has blown under many people's radars that they should try playing. And Rob, there's also this really fun urban legend associated with Darkseid that says that the intense pressure of designing this game led that designer, the first game designer, Mike Dawson, to actually have a mental breakdown.
Wow.
Contrary to popular belief, that is not true.
Boo.
After making Darkseid, he left the game industries and he started writing for television. He then left television after the 90s, wrote some books on programming, and now he teaches programming classes at the Los Angeles Film School. He helps people in film who need to learn a little bit of programming to work with some of the advanced tools, learn programming. But he's also taught at Stanford and he taught at UCLA along the way. So no mental breakdown. He just moved on from the video game industry, so to speak.
That's still cool.
Now, H.R. Giger ended up continuing to create art. He was putting on exhibitions until he died in 2014 at the age of 74. There is a lot of stuff. His stuff is very recognizable. He's commissioned a lot of really cool pieces by fans of Giger. So, for instance, the microphone stands that the band Korn uses on tour with them were actually designed by Giger. They are literally biomechanical microphone. At least Jonathan Davis's aluminum stand is a Giger whatchamacallit. They actually took that design and they translated it into a sculpture called Nubian Queen, which you can purchase now, so you can get it. But that's kind of fun to have designed microphone stands, you know. He designed the covers for artists like album covers for artists like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Deborah Harry, Carcass, Danzig, the Den Kennedys. So he, you know, his art is in music too. Of course, his Alien design is still being used to this day, and he worked on other Alien movies and provided other designs. He also worked on movies like Poltergeist 2. He helped design for. He helped design for the Species series as well. So there was some stuff. So he's done a lot of stuff. Literally, too, he got to like fully realize his like dream of an environment that is biomechanical, and he actually contributed to 2 bars that are in Switzerland that are literally like the whole theme is biomechanical, and they're literally called Giger bars. There's 2 of them, and he basically designed the whole thing. Now, one of those Giger bars is actually in the museum. There is an H.R. Giger museum that's in Switzerland. It is run by his most recent wife. I say that because he was married twice, so it's second wife. So if you're interested in going to see his artwork and you're ever in Switzerland, there is a whole H.R. Giger museum that has a lot of it. But if there's anything you take away from this, go look up Necronom 4 H.R. Giger, Giger, and you will literally like recognize it in an instance if you've ever seen what the alien looks like from the Alien movies. Like I never realized the reference before, but like it's so stupid obvious. Like, oh, that's the alien. Like you would look at it now and you would think it's the alien, but it's actually the precursor. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, his artwork was obviously great.
His I look, I loved biomechanical art style before I knew it was Giger. I think it's just so cool. Like the whole, it's cool and it's gross at the same time. This whole blend of mechanics and flesh and bone and everything. Like I said, I've always been a fan of biomechanical even before I knew who H.R. Giger was. But I do know who H.R. Giger was, and it's very fascinating. I would encourage you to look him up and look a little bit at his artwork and going from there. It's on posters. Like one of his earliest things is he got with the, like before he was in art galleries, he met like the biggest poster distributor in Switzerland and hooked up with him, and they started distributing posters of his artwork worldwide. So even early on, before he even got into Hollywood, like there were posters of his stuff available, so to speak. So of course it's like everywhere now. Like, and you know it once you know what biomechanical is and you recognize it, every time you see it now you're going to think of HR Giger because he is the poster child, and now you can just assume that anything biomechanical is HR Giger. I don't even know who else does it. Sorry if there are other people who do it. I apologize. So, but anyways, he made two video games, Dark Seed, and there we go. That's his story. That's HR Giger. That's Dark Seed. Two video games you probably, an artist, and two video games you probably didn't know anything about. You're
You
welcome.
got that right.
That's the goal, right? To tell you about things you didn't know anything about. Today we got to talk about Giger. We got to talk about Lee Tobler. We got to talk about Jodorowsky's Dune and how the Alien and the Aliens was conceived, and then how that same guy made a couple video games which are really obscure and not well known. And yeah, that's that.
That is indeed that, Dave.
So there are a lot of other things we referenced here, right? We just talked about how the composer did Zork games and Descent and Fallout and Civilization. We talked in the beginning about things like Capcom and Nintendo, and these are all things that we have done other episodes on. So, if you'd like to check out any of the history of any of these old episodes, then you would do so by going to our website, which is www.memorycarelane.com. Rob, what can else can people find on our website?
Well, Dave, you can find a calendar of our future episodes. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come talk games or whatever else with Dave and I. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our episodes. You can also find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we're going to tell you a story. It's going to be about one specific topic relevant to the current week in gaming history. This week, we talked about Dark Seed, which came out this week, roughly in 1993. And while doing so, we talked about the artist by whose artwork it inspired, H.R. Giger, and all sorts of interesting things related to Giger, like aliens and so on and so forth. So lots of fun stuff this week. One of the best parts about getting to sit down with this podcast week in and week out is that we basically learn that every time I sit down and do research on a new topic, I learn things. My whole goal every time I sit down for a topic is to try to pull things out of that topic that I don't know. And in turn, I honestly make the assumption that most of our listeners don't know. And that's the fun of it. What can I learn and what can I teach you? So, in recognition of that cycle of teaching and learning, we like to go around and talk about our takeaways each week. So, Rob, what did you learn this week?
Well, I learned pretty much everything, Dave. I didn't really know Giger's work. Not the name doesn't ring a bell. Never heard of Darkseid or any of that. So it's all very new to me. I do think that it's pretty cool, even though the whole thing didn't seem to come to fruition. But the Dune film, based on his work with Salvador Dali and Orson Welles and Pink Floyd, 14 Hours. I mean, that's that's a fuck ton of a lot. Like, that's insane.
Yeah, it really is.
And
For
I
sure.
know, even though I haven't seen or read Dune, I know that you have mentioned many, many, many times that it would be right up my alley. So just knowing that it could have had the that cast, that lineup of people, just it's insane. Like, even that was a thought, something that almost came to fruition.
Very true.
So that's it for me. How about yourself?
I never put it together that Giger inspired the alien. Um, I never put together that Giger inspired the alien. Like, it makes total sense now, but I had never put it together. So getting to learn that whole story was kind of fun, to be honest with you. And then getting to dive into his life, because I mean, I know Giger and biomechanical artwork, but I never, like most things that we do each week, I never paid attention to him and his life, and didn't know the whole tortured girl, artist thing, and the tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend, and just learning more about him and his life is fascinating. So that was all new for me, and I really enjoyed that deep dive. So yeah.
Definitely a cool story.
All right, Rob. Well, before I take it out of here, is there anything else that you'd like to add to today's episode?
Well, as always, Dave, I want to take one quick moment to say thank you so much to all of our listeners. It means the world to us to have you along for the ride as we learn about these sometimes obscure topics and sometimes big names and big things you recognize. So we hope you enjoy the bit of knowledge that you get to gain from all of this, and thanks for being here.
Awesome. Well, everyone, that's a wrap on our exploration into the haunting world of Darkseid. I hope that you've enjoyed diving into the eerie realms and artwork shaped by H.R. Giger's iconic artwork, and the twisted narrative that it inspired in Darkseid that challenged gamers back in the 90s. It's always fascinating to see how games like this push the boundaries of art and leave their own unique legacy in the world of gaming. Next week, though, we're shifting gears from the dark and airy to the bright and nostalgic as we journey back to the golden age of arcades. Next week, we're going to be looking at one of the most iconic games of all time, a game that defined a generation and set the stage for an entire industry. And that game is Space Invaders. From its groundbreaking gameplay to its unmistakable cultural impact, we're going to cover the history and the legacy of this arcade classic. So bring your cup of quarters and get ready to blast some alien invaders as we take yet another exciting trip down memory card lane.
Skibidi bop 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 doo bop bop ba doobly doo bop bop ba bop boo ah.